I mean, in itself, just a strong emotion, and how we communicate out of our inner uncomfortable experiences is something that, as a society globally, we're not very good at. We're like a baby that's just crawling or trying to crawl. And in a way, that there's a kind of disempowerment. How can we build alternative structures to the dominant ones when the kind of diverse landscape of our felt experiences and who we are is something that we're not very skilled at engaging with each other with. And so for me, as a kind of change maker / and attempting to straddle in the spiritual and both, there's a sort of necessary practice in how we can communicate, and things that are difficult and that we will mess up as well, and that's actually part of it. And then there's also, as I was kind of touching on just a moment ago, the idea of rank and power, that those who have power, they are comfortable, things are okay for them because they hold the controls, and so it's very easy for them to be calm, and to look down at someone who's raging or feeling powerless and kind of seemingly freaking out in despair. And it can look like otherworldly, look, can't you calm down? And there's a real blindness of that power, that it's often those who have power who don't see that gradient of power, that difference in power, as well. And also, I'm wondering in spiritual communities, and this is something I've noticed, that there can be a concentration of power, a hierarchy of power, and then there's also the need to be loving, and my sort of witnessing of some of this is and I'm speaking both kind of Muslim communities and outside of that as well, but my sort of sense of some of the dynamics that can go on is that that there can be a kind of anything that isn't love isn't us, it's something else. And so there can be a kind of real but subtle felt oppression that takes place, where with a lot of, on the surface, you can have all these very spiritual looking practices and really soothing and heart opening, and then the politics underneath can be really messy and is hidden from view. And I'm wondering if if you could maybe, if you have something to say around that, and also what's a way forward, if you found this experience, or are there examples where it's integrated, and particularly in Muslim spiritual communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, I feel quite emotional hearing you sort of speak to this. It's a really, it touches me deeply, because often the intentions with which we go into these places, spiritual places or groups, is very pure, and the initial experience is often one full of light and hope and love. And then the experience as you continue is that you find that, like, there are these power hierarchies, there's corruptions, that the things that you left other things for are actually in the community that you've made your home. And I think that there's actually so many teachings in Islam around this, and actually in other spiritual paths. And I guess that in itself gives a lot of hope. I would sort of say that, the dunya, the nature of the world as we experience it in, in all its relativity, as opposed to, the absolute and the pure, is the place where we discover continually that things are not black and white, and we have to understand and process all of that. And it does hurt, and inevitably, the thing that we invest and attach to, whether it's a group, whether it's a spiritual group, a practice, a person, a sheikh, a guru, a Thursday night dhikr, a Sufi wonderful thing, a traditional place, like a mosque full of beautiful whatever it is that we've become attached to. Allah says, we will test you by your own methods. In other words, the thing that you've become attached to, will eventually show up as something that isn't what you thought. And then, in our prayer, if we can say, Allahu Akbar, and genuinely hold our hands up and say, well, that divine consciousness, that absolute oneness is greater than all of that, and kind of have the humility to be able to put our hands up and say, I don't have a clue, but the universe does, God does. That allows, in a way, your heart to rest and to breathe and to understand that, this is a process in which, Allah has created us to make mistakes. And, He says that, if you're all perfect, I'd remove you and start again.
Yeah. And I guess there's something about how we embrace that imperfection that, in process work, they use the term higher dream and lower dream, that when you start with a higher dream and then there's the sort of reality of things. And it also reminds me, I was reading about the Occupy movement and Occupy Wall Street. And so, here, in fact, I think the book, I can't remember the exact name, but it was about Occupy Wall Street. And I did attend some of the Occupy gatherings, one in London and a couple in Brighton, where I live. And in this book on Occupy Wall Street, there was a real honest exploration of the movement and the lived experience. So Occupy was essentially a response to the economic system and the injustice of it. And yeah, it sort of was a movement that spread around the world. And people would gather and basically camp and occupy. There was Occupy London, Occupy. It was whatever cities and places. And so there was, I think, Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if that was the first one, but it was one of the most visible ones, kind of in the news that we got in the UK, apart from what was going on in England. And in that book, which was really fascinating, it's a brown book. I can't remember the exact name, but there'd be a community of people camping, living together, facing hostility from the ruling powerful, from the police and so forth, and negotiating things. And there were things like, we're going to have to clear the campsite for hygiene reasons. It's health and safety. And so they thought, okay, so they got their broomsticks out and just cleaned the whole thing themselves. So it was a real sort of, we've got power here, and sort of movement. And this is described really well in the book, of all these challenges that they faced, and also the, some of the, I was going to use the word hypocrisy, but maybe that's a strong word. But like, they'd have to rely on, sort of McDonald's for toilets and things like that. So there was that aspect. But then there was also, what they were finding is that the way people would set up in camping, that they were mirroring the society outside. that those who were middle class tended to be, I don't know, in the north or south or whatever it was, and it was always like was mirroring New York, you know, sort of Manhattan, you know, and they're like, wow. So in a way, they were internalized, you know, they brought internally aspects of the system, the pathology of the system externally, and for me, that is like almost inevitable in any group or organization, and how we engage with that is then what sort of comes next. Now's the opportunity right within our lived experience right there for us to process this. So how do we kind of respond to that, you know? And I'm just sort of sharing that because, you know, I feel that there is a question there, and it's not like there's an answer, but a need for the acknowledgement of that question and a kind of response to that as well. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I think what you said is really interesting, and I don't think there's an answer. I think there's sort of there's profound understandings that can come from that. And I think what you've sort of said is it's inviting really a compassionate response to the kind of, you know, the ways that we've internalized our privilege, and the way that, you know, we also are going to reduplicate our conditioning, you know, which you know, depends on structures of power, oppressive structures of power. And I guess my thoughts are, and this is not to sort of say that the struggle shouldn't happen, but, you know, the world is not a perfect place. And, you know, we are going to die. We're going to find that en route to that the things that we thought were so true are not true. There's going to be information that's declassified that makes us realize that, you know, everything we were fighting for was like absurd. We're going to see how the people that we trusted were not trustworthy. All of those things that happen in groups are going to happen. But the struggle is real. The struggle is important. You know, we're going to die, and we need to die trying. You know, there is, you know, as the Prophet ﷺ, there is a jihad, or is a struggle on the outside. And there's also a struggle on the inside, which is greater. And, you know, we have in our being, you know, we've been touched by that light of God that means that we love pure justice and pure love and perfection. And, you know, the rest is wound, and that wound occurs on the inside and on the outside. So there's really no separation between what we experience on the outside and that we're fighting against, and also what we have on the inside. Though we would like to say we're on the side of good, and, you know, the rest are the enemy and the oppressor. It's actually, the reality is it's so intertwined, and it can be helpful to separate. And there is a difference between the person who's bullied and the bullier. There is a difference between, you know, the sort of systems of Wall Street and the person who is struggling to make a living. There is for sure a difference, but we can't operate with a lack of humility or the rectitude, you know, of sort of smug rectitude. We have to be able to, I think, have a compassionate approach for our process and how that works. And I think that there are experiences that teach us that. So I think that what you're sort of saying, you know, is something which you've kind of saw at the time, and it's been written about. So that experience becomes yours, doesn't it? And, you know, I was speaking about mine, things that you begin to own and understand, and there's a wisdom in that.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I love what you're saying. Yeah, about the humility and that we don't know the bigger picture. That there's, you know, that we're going on limited information as well, and we're all, you know, we can all but try, but there's a softness in that as well, because, you know, of the humility that our response is coming from an understanding that is incomplete as well. And I speak also, yeah, in my own experience in groups, is that, you know, there's a time when you start to see the very things that you're sort of idealizing as being only outside of the group, you know, start to appear inside, and you know, but there's something about sort of staying with it, but also not, I guess for me, I guess where I threw in the idea of the question and the engaging with it is because for me, it doesn't feel right to accept it in the sense of, well, this is the way it is now. You know, this is, you know, it's okay for this to be normalized. You know, and my own experience in groups is, and this is also a kind of going against the grain, is spaces where within the group there can be conversations, there can be feedback mechanisms, and I you know, I guess my work sort of straddles the social and the kind of non-human natural world, you know. So, like, I mean, I'd call it ecological, you know, and that I kind of lost my train of thought there now. What I was going to say, but okay, maybe we'll come back. So anyway, if you want to respond, yeah.
Yeah, like I think you're talking about like not normalizing or accepting the sort of the issues that are wrong, whilst at the same time probably staying in those conversations and challenging them. And I mean, my experience of that is that, you know, it's, you know, I can sort of say that in my communities or in my work, you know, I have power, and I've kind of quote unquote become one of the elders, you know, without realizing it. And, you know, it's easy to become smug and to kind of shore up the system and sort of not admit that actually that there are issues, because now I'm comfortable, you know. And I think like it's important to just be open about that and try and be honest, and, you know, and also like a little bit forgiving of oneself as well, that, you know, yeah, like now my friends and mates, we're all happy and we can sit around and talk spiritual chat. You know, it doesn't mean that we are and that we're sorted, and, you know, that everybody else has got problems, just not us. You know, it doesn't mean that. And just because, you know, I'm the one facilitating this work doesn't mean that, you know, I'm the expert. It means that I have responsibility. It means that I have accountability. It means that I need to keep checking if I've got something to offer, and if that's real. And if I have, you know, also to come forward with it, because I think it's easy also to walk out and to become disenchanted, or, you know, to fall back on your traditional patterns, you know. And I think, you know, I always find very resonating, you know, that thing of when you go on Hajj, that when you arrive in Mecca, you say, Labbaik Allah Labbaik, you know, I'm here. And there you are, you're a pilgrim, you've got nothing, you know, you've got nothing on pretty much, no stitches to hold you, nothing. And you're going to give in to the ecstasy of circling around the Kaaba, you know, which is representing the idol-free place of your heart. and you just go into that ecstasy. And then, having melted into the ocean of kind of your utter non-existence, and that you don't matter as an ego, you know, then you have to go to Medina and start building the society. And in the Quran, all the Medinan verses are messy, because they're telling you, like, do this, don't do this, and there's always arguments for and against stuff. You know, but you know, but to actually go for it and build is important for our own hearts and our own spirituality, and yeah, you know, and because we're relational, you know, we're relational beings, ourselves, you know, are intertwined with otherness and interdependency, and you know, giving and receiving in all its different facets. So yeah, I mean, I guess it that process and conversations and just coming together is really precious to me.
Yeah, and so much in that, so much in what that means to come together. Yeah, there's, and you touched on Medina as well, and you know, and you know, there's forming society that existed there, and just like to touch on, you know, I guess particularly Muslim organizations and also decision making.